The crimson sun of Zeptron cast long shadows across the colossal arena, its blood-red light illuminating the thousands of spectators who had gathered to witness what they believed would be another routine execution. The amphitheater stretched for miles, carved from the living rock of the planet itself, its terraced seats rising like stairs to the heavens. At the center of this magnificent structure stood a platform made of blackened steel, stained with the blood of countless victims who had met their end in this very spot. Elira knelt on the platform, her wrists bound with energy shackles that hummed with a low, ominous frequency. The azure skin of her arms bore intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dim light. Marks of her warrior caste symbols that had once filled her with pride, but now served only as proof of her alleged crimes against the Empire. Her silver hair, traditionally worn in warrior's braids, hung loose and disheveled around her face. Yet her eyes remained defiant, burning with an inner fire that even the prospect of death could not extinguish. The charges against her had been read in the ancient tongue of her people: treason, insubordination, and the ultimate crime, refusing to participate in what the Empire called a cleansing operation, but what she knew to be nothing more than genocide. The memory of that day still burned in her mind like acid. She had been ordered to lead her battalion against a peaceful colony of farmers on the Rim Worlds, people whose only crime was existing in a region the Empire wanted to claim. When she had refused, drawing her blade not against the colonists, but against her own commanding officer, her fate had been sealed. The crowd roared as the executioner stepped onto the platform. He was a massive creature standing nearly 3 meters tall, his 4 arms each ending in razor-sharp claws that dripped with a paralytic toxin. The traditional quartering would be slow, methodical, each limb separated with precise cuts, while the victim remained conscious to feel every moment of agony. It was meant to serve as a lesson to any who might consider defying the Empire's will. Elira closed her eyes and tried to center herself, drawing upon the meditation techniques her grandmother had taught her as a child. In her mind, she could hear the old woman's voice. "Pain is temporary, little star, but honor is eternal." She would die with honor even if she died alone. But she wasn't alone. High in the uppermost tiers of the arena, where the shadows were deepest and the guards' attention was scattered, a figure moved with practiced stealth. Jack Morrison had been a prisoner of war for 3 years, captured during the disastrous Battle of Proxima Station, when his patrol ship had been ambushed by Imperial vessels. Unlike the other human prisoners who had been pressed into service as manual laborers or gladiators, Jack had been assigned to maintenance duty due to his background as an engineer. This had given him access to areas of the arena that others never saw, including the ventilation systems that ran like arteries through the structure's massive frame. He had spent months planning this moment, gathering intelligence, stealing supplies, piece by piece. Not for himself, his own escape seemed impossible, but for something larger. The Empire had made a mistake in letting him overhear the conversations of their officers, and he had learned that Elira was more than just another condemned warrior. She was the daughter of a resistance leader, one of the few people who knew the location of hidden rebel bases throughout the galaxy. Her death would not just be an execution. It would be the death of hope for millions of oppressed beings across the Empire's territory. Jack's weathered face bore the scars of his captivity, lines etched by pain and hardship that made him look older than his 35 years. His brown hair had grown long and unkempt, and his once military bearing had been replaced by the careful movements of someone who had learned to survive by staying invisible. Yet beneath this exterior, the fire of determination still burned bright. He had made a promise to himself and to the memory of his fallen comrades: he would not let the Empire win without a fight. The executioner raised his blades, the metal gleaming in the arena's harsh lighting. The crowd fell silent in anticipation, thousands of eyes focused on the figure kneeling on the platform below. Elira opened her eyes and looked straight ahead, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing fear. That's when the first explosion ripped through the arena's eastern wall. Jack had spent 6 months stealing components for the makeshift bombs, smuggling them piece by piece from the maintenance stores. He had timed everything perfectly. The charges would go off in sequence, creating maximum chaos and confusion. The first blast sent chunks of stone and metal flying across the lower tiers, while smoke and dust billowed into the air. Screams echoed from the crowd. They scrambled to escape their orderly ranks, dissolving into panic. The second explosion came from the arena's power station, plunging half the complex into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made the chaos even more surreal. Guards rushed about in confusion, shouting orders that were lost in the din of falling debris and terrified voices. Jack slid down a maintenance cable and landed hard on the arena floor. His improvised weapons clutched in his hands. He had cobbled together a weapon from spare parts, part energy, rifle part, projectile launcher, and strapped additional explosive charges to his belt. He knew he was outgunned and outnumbered, but he also knew that surprise was his greatest ally. The executioner had drawn back, confused by the sudden chaos. His 4 eyes swiveled in different directions, trying to identify the source of the disturbance. Alira used the distraction to test her bonds, finding that the energy shackles had been disrupted by the power surge. They flickered indeed, and she felt strength return to her limbs. Jack burst through the smoke like an avenging spirit, his weapon firing in controlled bursts. The energy bolts found their mark, sending 2 guards tumbling from the platform, while their armor sparked and smoked. He rolled behind a support pillar as return fire sizzled past his head, chunks of stone exploding in the wake of the plasma bolts. "Can you fight?" he shouted to Alira, tossing her a combat knife he had stolen from the armory. She caught the blade one-handed and tested its weight, a fierce smile crossing her face. "I was born fighting," she replied, her voice carrying the musical accent of her people. Together they made their stand on the platform, back to back, as guards poured into the arena from all sides. Alira moved with the fluid grace of her warrior training, the knife dancing in her hands as she parried and struck with precise, economical movements. Despite her time in captivity, her skills had not dulled. If anything, the prospect of freedom had sharpened them to a razor's edge. Jack fought with the desperate fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. His movements were less refined than Alira's, but equally effective, each shot carefully aimed, each explosive charge placed for maximum impact. He had studied the guards' movements during his time as a prisoner, learning their patterns and weaknesses. The executioner finally overcame his confusion and charged toward them with a roar that shook the very stones of the arena. His massive form bounded across the platform in great leaps, his claws extended and dripping with poison. Alira met his charge head-on, ducking beneath his first swing and slicing deep into the tendons of his lower left arm. The creature howled in pain and rage, spinning to bring his other arms into play. Jack provided covering fire, his shots keeping the approaching guards at bay, while Alira danced around the executioner's increasingly desperate attacks. The creature's size was his weakness. He was powerful, but not agile, and Alira exploited every opening he gave her. She carved intricate patterns in his hide, each cut precisely placed to cause maximum pain while avoiding vital organs. The executioner's own blood became his downfall, making his footing treacherous as he slipped and stumbled. The final stroke came when the executioner, blinded by pain and rage, overcommitted to a downward strike. Alira sidestepped at the last moment and drove her blade deep into the base of his skull, severing the neural pathways that controlled his motor functions. The massive creature toppled forward like a felled tree, his body convulsing once before falling still. But their victory was short-lived. More guards poured into the arena, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the tunnels that connected to the platform. Imperial reinforcements were arriving, and soon they would be overwhelmed. "This way!" Jack shouted, grabbing Alira's hand and pulling her toward a maintenance shaft he had prepared as an escape route. They leaped from the platform just as a barrage of plasma fire scorched the air where they had been standing. The shaft led to a maze of service tunnels that honeycombed the arena's structure. Jack had memorized every twist and turn during his years of captivity, and he led them through the darkness with sure steps. Behind them, they could hear the guards' pursuit, their heavy boots echoing off the tunnel walls as tracking lights swept back and forth. They emerged into a loading bay where a stolen transport waited its engines already humming with power. Jack had spent months preparing this escape route, bribing and blackmailing other prisoners to help him gather the necessary components. The ship was old and battered, but it would serve their purpose. As they ran toward the vessel, plasma bolts began to strike the ground around them. The guards had caught up emerging from multiple tunnels with their weapons raised. Elira spun and returned fire with a weapon she had taken from a fallen guard, her shots precise and deadly despite the chaos. They reached the transport just as a squad of Imperial shock troopers burst into the bay. These were elite soldiers, their armor black as space, and their movements precise and coordinated. They moved with mechanical efficiency, spreading out to surround the transport while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Jack slammed his fist on the ship's emergency launch override, and the engines roared to life. The transport lurched upward, its hull scraping against the bay's ceiling as it fought to gain altitude. Plasma fire lit up the darkness around them, and the ship shuddered as several shots found their mark. "Get us out of here," Elira shouted, taking the co-pilot's seat and beginning to work the ship's targeting systems. "Working on it," Jack replied, his hands flying over the controls. The transport wasn't designed for combat, but he had made what modifications he could with stolen parts. They burst from the loading bay and into the open air of Zeptron, the planet's capital city sprawling below them like a cancer of metal and stone. Imperial fighters rose to meet them, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere with predatory grace. The transport's alarms screamed warnings as missile locks were acquired and lost, the ship's primitive countermeasures struggling to cope with the advanced targeting systems of their pursuers. Elira worked frantically at the weapons console, trying to coax more power from the ship's overtaxed systems. She managed to get their rear guns online, just as the first fighter came within range, sending a stream of energy bolts that forced the enemy pilot to break off his attack run. They flew through the canyons between the city's towering spires, using the terrain to break the fighter's targeting locks. Jack pushed the transport to its limits, the engine screaming in protest as he executed turns that should have torn the ship apart. His years in the Imperial prison had taught him patience and planning, but they had also taught him audacity when the situation demanded it. A fighter pilot made the mistake of following them into a narrow canyon, and Elira was ready. She sent a full volley into the canyon wall above the pursuing craft, bringing down an avalanche of stone and metal that crushed the enemy fighter. One down, but more were coming. They broke atmosphere with Imperial pursuit ships, still on their trail, the stars wheeling overhead as they achieved orbit. Elira. Input coordinates for a hyperspace jump, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. She knew systems beyond the Empire's reach, hidden worlds where they might find refuge among those who opposed the Imperial regime. "Hold on," she warned, as the hyperspace engines spun up to full power. The stars elongated into brilliant lines, and Zeptron vanished behind them as they leaped across the galaxy. They had escaped, but their journey was far from over. The hidden planet of Sanctuary was little more than a designation on star charts, its very existence known only to a select few. It was a world of verdant forests and crystal-clear lakes, a place where refugees from across the galaxy had gathered to form a secret society dedicated to resisting Imperial rule. The planet's natural magnetic field interfered with long-range sensors, making it nearly invisible to Imperial scouts. Elira brought their battered transport down in a clearing near the main settlement, the ship's systems failing one by one as they touched the ground. Steam rose from overheated engines, and warning lights flashed across every console. The vessel had given everything it had to get them here. As they stumbled from the wreckage, Elira's legs finally gave out. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the escape was wearing off. and the exhaustion of months in captivity was taking its toll. Jack caught her before she could fall, supporting her weight as they made their way toward the settlement. The rebels who greeted them were a diverse group: humans, Altarians, vegan nomads, and a dozen other species, all united by their hatred of imperial oppression. They had been expecting Elira. The Resistance Network had ways of communicating that even the Empire couldn't intercept. In the weeks that followed, Elira and Jack recovered from their ordeal while learning about the broader resistance movement. Sanctuary was home to survivors from across the galaxy, each with their own story of loss and defiance. There were scientists who had refused to develop weapons of mass destruction, soldiers who had turned against their own forces, civilians who had seen their families murdered for no crime other than existing. Dr. Sarah Chen, the settlement's chief medical officer, treated Elira's injuries while Jack underwent surgery to repair damage from his years in captivity. The doctor was a former Imperial researcher who had defected when she discovered the true nature of the biological weapons program. She had dedicated her skills to healing rather than destruction, and her gentle hands brought relief to those who had suffered under Imperial rule. As Elira healed, she began to take on a leadership role in the resistance. Her knowledge of Imperial military tactics was invaluable, and her skill as a warrior inspired others to greater efforts. She organized training sessions and planned raids on Imperial supply lines, always careful to minimize civilian casualties. Jack found his calling in the technical aspects of the resistance. His engineering skills were put to use developing better weapons and improving their communication systems. He worked closely with other former prisoners and defectors, sharing knowledge that had been gained at great cost. It was during one of these technical sessions that they made a discovery that changed everything. A former Imperial researcher named Dr. Marcus Vale had escaped from a secret laboratory with data files that revealed the true scope of the Empire's latest project. The files spoke of a biological weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, a virus that could rewrite the genetic code of any living being, turning them into mindless servants of the Empire. They call it the Dominion strain, Dr. Vale explained, his voice hollow with horror. It's transmitted through the air, spreads rapidly through any atmosphere. Once infected, a being retains their physical form, but becomes completely subservient to Imperial command. They tested it on prisoners. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Such a weapon could end all resistance, turning free beings into slaves without the need for armies or occupation forces. Worse yet, the files indicated that Elira was a key component of the project. Her unique genetic markers made her immune to the virus, and the Empire planned to use her blood to create an antidote that they could sell back to conquered populations at any price they chose. That's why they wanted to keep you alive, Jack realized, looking at Elira with new understanding. The execution was just theater. They planned to fake your death and take you to their laboratory. Elira's face hardened with resolution. Then we have to stop them. The decision to launch a preemptive strike against the laboratory was not made lightly. It would mean exposing Sanctuary's location and sacrificing the safety they had built. But the alternative, allowing the Empire to deploy such a weapon, was unthinkable. They prepared for months, gathering intelligence, and resources. The laboratory was located on Nexus Prime, one of the Empire's most heavily fortified worlds. Getting there would require a miracle. Getting inside would require a dozen miracles. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. They would pose as a prisoner transport, with Elira playing the role of a captured resistance leader, being brought for interrogation. Jack and a team of volunteers would pose as guards, their faces altered with subtle surgery to match Imperial records. Once inside, they would plant charges throughout the facility while gathering as much data as possible about the virus. The night before their departure, Elira and Jack stood together on a hill overlooking Sanctuary. The settlement sparkled with lights below them, a beacon of hope in a galaxy grown dark with oppression. "You don't have to do this," Jack said quietly. "Your immunity makes you too valuable to risk." Elira turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "I've been running from the Empire all my life. First as a soldier forced to carry out their orders, then as a fugitive fleeing their justice. I won't run anymore." Jack nodded, understanding her need for closure. In the months they had spent together, they had grown close, their shared experiences, creating a bond deeper than mere friendship. He had found in her something he had thought lost, forever hope for a future worth fighting for. "Then we do this together," he said, taking her hand. The journey to Nexus Prime took them through Imperial space, their stolen codes and false identities, holding up under the scrutiny of patrol ships and customs officials. The closer they got to their destination, the tighter security became. By the time they reached the final checkpoint, tension in their small ship was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nexus Prime was a world of stark contrasts. Gleaming cities connected by maglev trains, vast industrial complexes belching smoke into the atmosphere, and hidden laboratories where the Empire's darkest secrets were born. The particular facility they sought was built into the side of a mountain, its entrance guarded by automated defense systems and an entire brigade of Imperial troops. Their transport was escorted through the outer defenses to a landing platform hewn from the mountain's living rock. Imperial officers waited to receive them, their uniforms crisp and their faces coldly efficient. The moment of truth had arrived. "Prisoner transfer from Sector 7, announced Lieutenant Torres, whose face had been surgically altered to match the identity they had stolen. "High priority subject for Project Dominion." The Imperial officer in charge, Colonel Voss, examined their documents with microscopic attention to detail. Each second stretched like an eternity as he compared photographs and checked authorization codes. "Everything appears to be in order," he said finally. "Transport the prisoner to Laboratory 7. Dr. Helena Stark is waiting." They were escorted through corridors carved from stone and lined with metal, the walls humming with the power of the facility's energy systems. At every checkpoint, their identities were verified, again, biometric scanners and thought readers probing for any hint of deception. The laboratory was a vast chamber filled with gleaming equipment and containment units. At its center stood Dr. Helena Stark, the Empire's chief biological researcher and architect of the Dominion strain. She was a woman of middle years, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes holding the cold intelligence of a predator. "So," she said, circling Alira like a scientist examining a specimen. "The famous Alira Mindara. Your genetics are quite fascinating. A complete immunity to our little creation. We've been looking forward to studying you." Alira remained silent, playing her role perfectly. Behind the doctor, Jack and his team spread out through the laboratory, their movements seeming casual but calculated. They had rehearsed this moment countless times. "Begin the preliminary scans," Dr. Stark ordered her assistants. "I want a complete genetic profile before we proceed to extraction." As the medical technicians approached with their equipment, Jack gave the signal. What happened next occurred in mere seconds, but seemed to unfold in slow motion. The first explosive charge detonated in the laboratory's power core, plunging the facility into emergency lighting. Backup systems activated with klaxons wailing as blast doors began to seal. Jack's team moved with military precision, each member targeting specific objectives. Lieutenant Torres revealed his true nature as he drew a concealed weapon and fired on the guards. His shots were true, but more soldiers were already pouring into the laboratory. Dr. Stark screamed orders to protect the research, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Alira shattered her restraints. They had been designed to hold a normal prisoner, not a warrior who had been merely pretending to be helpless. She moved like liquid lightning, her hand striking nerve clusters and pressure points with deadly precision. 2 technicians collapsed before they even realized they were under attack. The laboratory became a battleground, energy weapons firing in all directions, while computer terminals exploded in showers of sparks. Jack fought his way to the central data core, downloading everything he could, while fending off attacks from all sides. Dr. Stark had taken shelter behind an overturned table, clutching a datapad with precious research files. She was trying to transmit them to an off-site backup when Elira appeared before her like an avenging angel. "You would enslave the entire galaxy," Elira said, her voice carrying the weight of condemnation. "I would bring order to chaos," the doctor replied, her eyes burning with zealotry. "The Dominion strain will end war and suffering. Perfect unity under Imperial rule. Unity without freedom is death." Elira responded and struck. The doctor fell, her datapad clattering across the floor as its screen cracked. Around them, the laboratory's defenses were finally overwhelming the small team of saboteurs. Too many guards, too many layers of security. They had succeeded in destroying much of the research, but at a terrible cost. Jack reached the data core just as an explosion tore through the wall behind him. His fingers flew across the controls, copying files and wiping hard drives with equal speed. The knowledge they had gained would be useful, but only if they could escape to share it. "Time to go!" he shouted over the sound of grinding metal and screaming alarms. They fought their way toward the emergency exits, their path lit by the glow of fires burning throughout the facility. The mountain itself seemed to be coming apart around them, structural supports failing as the explosions cascaded through interconnected systems. In the corridor leading to the hangar, they encountered Colonel Voss leading a squad of elite troops. These were veterans of a dozen campaigns, their movements precise and their aim true. The narrow space became a killing ground as both sides sought cover behind fallen debris. Torres fell first, his chest erupting in a spray of blood as an energy bolt found its mark. Then came Jefferson and Samuel, until only Jack and Elira remained pinned down behind an overturned cart while energy bolts scorched the air above their heads. "Go," Jack said, passing the data crystal to Elira. "Get this information to Sanctuary. The galaxy needs to know." "I won't leave you," she replied, her voice fierce with determination. He smiled sadly. "You have to. This information is more important than any one life." Before she could protest, he rose from cover and charged down the corridor, his weapon blazing. The guards focused on him, giving Elira the opening she needed to slip past them. She ran for the hangar, tears streaming down her face as the sound of battle faded behind her. Her heart screamed at her to go back to die fighting beside the man who had saved her, but her mind knew that he was right. The data crystal contained the Empire's darkest secrets, and it had to reach those who could use it to save billions of lives. The hangar was in chaos, emergency evacuation in progress as personnel fled the dying facility. Elira commandeered a single-seat fighter, her warriors' training taking over as she powered up the systems and prepared for launch. As her ship lifted from the platform, she looked back to see Jack emerge onto the hangar deck. He was bloodied and limping, but alive. Their eyes met for one impossible moment across the distance, and she saw him mouth a single word: "Go." Imperial fighters were scrambling to intercept her, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere like metal wasps. She pushed her stolen craft to its limits, using every trick she had learned during her years in the Imperial military. The G-forces were crushing, threatening to tear her apart, but she held on through sheer force of will. Behind her, the mountain facility exploded in a chain reaction that could be seen from orbit. A pillar of fire and debris rose into the atmosphere, carrying with it the Empire's hopes for easy dominion and the sacrifice of brave souls who had died to prevent it. She broke free of the planet's gravity well, just as the last of the pursuing fighters fell behind, their fuel exhausted, and their orders changed to search and rescue. The hyperspace jump was engaged with coordinates already locked in, and once again the stars became streaks of light as she fled across the galaxy. The return to Sanctuary was bittersweet. Their mission had succeeded beyond all hopes. The primary research facility was destroyed, the scientist responsible was dead, and they had obtained enough data to understand and potentially counter the Dominion strain. But the cost had been terrible. Of the 12 volunteers who had left for Nexus Prime, only Elira had returned. In the weeks that followed, scientists and technicians at Sanctuary worked around the clock to analyze the data Elira had brought back. what they found was even worse than they had feared. The Empire had already begun production of the virus, with deployment scheduled for multiple worlds simultaneously. Billions of beings would be infected before anyone could react. But there was hope in the darkness. The research files contained detailed information about the virus's structure and weaknesses. With time and resources, it might be possible to develop not just a cure, but a vaccine that could provide immunity to entire populations. The resistance network spread the word across the galaxy, sharing knowledge and coordinating efforts. Hidden laboratories on 100 worlds began working to develop countermeasures, while strike teams prepared to sabotage deployment sites before the virus could be released. Elira threw herself into the work with desperate energy, training new warriors and planning increasingly bold raids against Imperial installations. She pushed herself to exhaustion, sleeping only when she collapsed from fatigue and eating only when others forced food upon her. It was Dr. Sarah Chen who finally confronted her about her behavior. "You can't save everyone by killing yourself," the doctor said gently, cornering Elira in the settlement's medical bay. "Jack wouldn't want this." "How do you know what he would want?" Elira replied, her voice sharp with pain. "He's dead because of my mission, my board." "He's dead because he chose to be," Chen corrected. "He believed in what you were fighting for. Honor that choice by living, not by destroying yourself." Slowly, Elira began to heal. She still fought, still led raids, and trained warriors, but she also began to see beyond the war. She started teaching children, passing on the stories and traditions of her people. She worked with the engineers, helping to design new defensive systems for refugee settlements. Most importantly, she began to believe again that victory was possible. The first deployment of the Dominion strain came 6 months after the raid on Nexus Prime. The Empire had chosen Kelterra 4, a mining world, with a population of 12 million, as their test site. The virus was released into the atmosphere through a network of orbital platforms, invisible and odorless, as it settled over the planet like a shroud. The resistance was ready. Hidden beacons activated across the planet, transmitting a carefully modulated signal that triggered pre-positioned caches of antidote gas. The countermeasure had been designed based on the stolen data synthesized in secret laboratories and smuggled onto the planet over months of preparation. As the Dominion strain spread across Kelterra 4, so did its antidote. The two viral agents met and neutralized each other in the atmosphere, creating a brief but brilliant light show as bioluminescent particles fell like snow from an orange sky. The Empire's perfect weapon had been defeated on its first deployment. Word spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Resistance had struck a blow against the Empire's most powerful weapon, proving that even their finest scientists could be outmatched. More importantly, they had shown that the Dominion strain could be countered, that slavery was not inevitable. The Empire's response was swift and brutal. Massive fleets were dispatched to destroy known Resistance strongholds, while secret police rounded up suspected dissidents on 1,000 worlds. The war that had been fought in shadows now erupted into open conflict. Sanctuary held out for 3 weeks under siege by the 7th Imperial Fleet. The planet's natural defenses and the courage of its defenders made it a fortress in space, but even the bravest walls must eventually fall to overwhelming force. In the end, it was not conquest, but sacrifice that decided the day. As Imperial forces finally breached the main defensive lines, the Resistance leadership made a terrible decision. The mountain that housed their primary base was honeycombed with explosives, placed there as a final insurance against capture. If Sanctuary was to fall, it would not be captured intact. Elira stood on the command deck watching as evacuation ships lifted off from hidden bays scattered across the planet. Each vessel carried refugees to secret destinations across the galaxy. New worlds where the Resistance could take root and grow again. The countdown reached 0, and the mountain disappeared in a pillar of nuclear fire. But from the ashes of Sanctuary, The resistance rose again stronger than before. The knowledge of how to counter the Dominion strain spread to every corner of the galaxy, while the Empire found itself fighting a war on 1,000 fronts. What had begun as an execution in an arena had grown into a galactic revolution. Years passed. The war raged across star systems, with victories and defeats on both sides. The Empire deployed variant strains of their virus, while the Resistance developed new countermeasures to match each mutation. Worlds burned and worlds were liberated, heroes fell and heroes rose. Alara led from the front, her name becoming legend among the oppressed peoples of the galaxy. She was the sword of the Resistance, the one who had faced execution and escaped to bring down an empire. Statues were raised in her honor on liberated worlds, and children born in secret resistance bases were given her name. But she herself felt only emptiness where joy should have been. Each victory was tainted by the memory of those who had died to achieve it, each liberated world, a reminder of those still under Imperial rule. She had found her purpose in fighting, but had lost her reason for living. It was on the 3rd anniversary of Jack's death that she received word that would change everything. The transmission came through the Resistance network, coded in frequencies known only to the highest levels of command. The source was identified as Omega Base, a top-secret facility that had been thought destroyed months earlier. For Illyra Mindara, the message said simply, "We have something that belongs to you." Intrigued despite herself, Alara traveled to the coordinates provided. Omega Base was hidden in an asteroid field in a dead system, its location known only to a few trusted operatives. The base itself was a wonder of engineering, carved from a solid chunk of rock and shielded from detection by advanced technology. She was met at the airlock by Commander Reynolds, an old friend from the early days of the Resistance. His scarred face split into a grin as he saw her. "Alara, old friend, it's good to see you." "Reynolds," she replied, embracing him briefly. "Your message mentioned something of mine." "Indeed. Follow me." He led her through corridors bustling with activity. Omega Base was clearly thriving. Its walls lined with advanced machinery, and its personnel moving with the confidence of those who knew their cause was just. They stopped before a door marked with medical symbols. Reynolds placed his hand on the scanner, and the portal hissed open. Inside was a medical facility, unlike any Alara had seen. The technology was decades ahead of anything the Resistance had previously possessed, gleaming with the perfection of Empire manufacture. At the center of the room was a single bed surrounded by monitoring equipment and life support systems. On the bed lay Jack. Alira's breath caught in her throat. He was older, thinner, his hair now completely gray, and his face marked by suffering. But he was alive gloriously, and impossibly alive. "How?" she whispered. "The data you recovered from Nexus Prime," Reynolds explained. "Among the files were records of something called Project Phoenix, an Imperial program to enhance soldiers with regenerative capabilities. We've spent 3 years perfecting the process, and now—" Jack's eyes opened, focusing slowly on Alira's face. For a moment he seemed confused, as if struggling to remember something important. Then recognition dawned, and he smiled. "Hello, Alara." She was at his side in an instant, taking his hand in hers. It was warm, solid, real. The tears she had held back for 3 years finally came washing away the accumulated pain and guilt. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed. "I saw you fall, saw the explosion." "I was dead," he replied weakly, "for nearly 2 years. They kept my body in stasis trying experimental treatments. The regeneration process only succeeded recently." Reynolds cleared his throat diplomatically. "I'll leave you two to catch up. Jack, the doctors want to run some more tests later, but for now, rest." As the door closed, Alara and Jack were alone for the first time in 3 years. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared memories. "Tell me," Jack said finally, "did we win? Is the galaxy free?" Alara laughed through her tears. "We're still fighting. But yes, I think we're winning. The Dominion strain has been countered. New worlds join the resistance every day. The Empire is crumbling from within. Good, he said, closing his eyes. Then it was worth it. Over the following weeks, as Jack recovered his strength, Alira found herself changing. The hard edge that had driven her for 3 years began to soften. She started to laugh again, to hope again. Most importantly, she began to believe that their struggle might actually lead to something better. The war continued, but now it took on a different character for her. Where once she had fought from anger and despair, now she fought from love. Love for Jack, love for the freedom they were building, love for the future that seemed possible at last. Together they planned new strategies and led new missions. Jack's expertise in Imperial technology proved invaluable as they infiltrated enemy installations and liberated prisoner camps. Alira's warrior skills, tempered now by wisdom and hope, inspired others to greater and greater acts of heroism. The final battle came, as all things must, when they least expected it. Intelligence gathered from captured Imperial officers revealed the location of the Empire's true nerve center. A massive space station, known as the Iron Throne, hidden in the dark space between galaxies. It was from here that the Emperor himself ruled his domain, protected by the most advanced technology and the loyalty of his finest troops. The assault on the Iron Throne was the culmination of everything the Resistance had worked toward. Ships from 100 worlds converged on the hidden station, a vast armada representing every species and culture that had suffered under Imperial rule. The battle was epic in scope, spanning dozens of star systems, as Imperial forces rushed to defend their capital, while the Resistance threw everything they had at the station's defenses. Energy weapons painted space in brilliant colors, while explosions blossomed like deadly flowers among the stars. Jack and Alira led one of the boarding parties, fighting their way through the station's corridors as gravity shifted and atmosphere vented into space. The artificial gravity failed and returned in waves, sending bodies floating in chaotic spirals before slamming them back to the deck. They reached the throne room to find it empty, save for a holographic projection of the Emperor. The aged despot's image glowed with ethereal light, his eyes holding the madness of absolute power. "So the criminals come at last to face justice," the Emperor said, his voice carrying across the room with amplified authority. "You have destroyed worlds, killed billions, all in the name of your precious freedom." "You speak of justice," Alira replied, stepping forward with her weapon ready. "You who would enslave the entire galaxy." The Emperor laughed, the sound echoing from hidden speakers. "I would bring order to chaos. I would end suffering by ending choice." The Dominion strain was merely the first step toward a perfect universe. "Your perfect universe is death," Jack said. "Freedom has meaning only if it includes the right to choose wrongly." "Philosophy?" the Emperor sneered. "You will find that philosophy is poor armor against final solutions." The hologram vanished, and the room erupted with hidden weapons. Automated defenses emerged from the walls, filling the air with deadly energy. Jack and Alira dove for cover, their weapons blazing, as they tried to find the control systems that governed the traps. Working together, they systematically disabled each defensive system. Their years of fighting side by side had created an almost telepathic understanding between them, each anticipating the other's movements and adapting their actions accordingly. When the last gun fell silent, they found themselves facing a single sealed door marked with Imperial seals. Beyond it lay the Emperor's personal chambers, and hopefully, the man himself. The door hissed open to reveal an austere chamber dominated by a massive viewport. Beyond the transparent aluminum, the battle raged in silence, ships dying in brief flowers of light against the infinite darkness. The Emperor stood with his back to them, a frail figure dwarfed by the enormity of space. When he turned, they saw a man consumed by age and madness, his eyes holding the fevered light of one who had lived too long with absolute power. "You have won nothing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even now my final weapon prepares to launch. You call it the Omega strain, a virus that will kill everything everywhere? If I cannot rule the galaxy, then the galaxy will die. Horror filled Elira's heart. An Omega strain that could kill all life would mean the end of everything Resistance and Empire alike. Their victory would be meaningless if it led to galactic extinction. "Stop it," she demanded, raising her weapon. "Cancel the launch." The Emperor smiled a death's head rictus that chilled them both. "The launch codes died with me," he said, and triggered a hidden device. Poison gas flooded his lungs as a dead man's switch activated throughout the station. Alarms wailed as the Emperor collapsed his final act, one of ultimate spite. In dying, he had ensured that none could call off the Omega strain's release. Jack was already at the control console, his fingers flying over the interface. "I can delay it," he said grimly, "but not stop it. We need the primary launch codes, and those were genetically keyed to the Emperor's DNA. Elira looked at the Emperor's corpse, an idea forming in her mind. What if we don't stop it? What if we change its target? She worked alongside Jack, using her knowledge of Imperial systems gained from years of sabotage and theft. Together, they began to reprogram the Omega strain's delivery systems, redirecting them away from inhabited worlds and toward the empty void between galaxies. It was delicate work, made more difficult by the battle raging around them. The Iron Throne shuddered with impact after impact as Resistance forces finally breached the outer defenses. Time was running out. With seconds to spare, they completed the reprogramming. The Omega strain launched as scheduled, but its target was now the empty darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. The ultimate weapon would die alone in the void, its lethal gift wasted on vacuum and radiation. The Emperor's death marked the end of the Empire's central authority. Without his iron will to hold it together, the massive state began to fragment into smaller kingdoms and republics. Some remained brutal dictatorships, but many others embraced the ideals of freedom that the Resistance had fought to spread. The war was over, but the work of peace had just begun. In the years that followed, Elira and Jack traveled from world to world, helping to establish new governments and rebuild societies shattered by centuries of oppression. They became ambassadors of a sort, their story inspiring others to choose cooperation over conquest. They settled on a world called Haven, a planet of gentle seasons and blue skies, where refugees from across the galaxy had come to build new lives. The climate was perfect for the gardens they planted together, each flower, a symbol of life chosen over death, growth over destruction. Their children grew up hearing the stories of the Resistance, but also learning the value of peace. The eldest, a daughter they named Hope, showed her mother's warrior spirit, but chose to use it in defense of the innocent, rather than in conquest of the strong. As Elira watched Hope train with wooden swords in their garden, she felt a deep contentment settle over her heart. The universe was not perfect. There was still conflict, still suffering, but it was better than it had been. The Empire's dark dream of absolute order had been replaced by the chaotic but hopeful reality of freedom. Jack joined her on the garden's terrace, his hair now fully silver, but his eyes still bright with intelligence and love. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children play while the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked quietly. "The choices we made, the war we fought." Elira considered the question seriously. They had both sacrificed much years of their lives, friends who had died in the cause the simple pleasure of a peaceful existence. But they had also gained something precious, a galaxy where beings could choose their own destinies. "No," she said finally. "I regret the necessity of it, but not the choice. We gave the galaxy something worth having, the right to be free." They had been planning to explore some nearby ruins, remnants of an ancient civilization that predated even the Empire. Archaeological expeditions had found evidence of advanced technology and artistic achievement, suggesting a culture that had valued both progress and beauty. As they prepared for their expedition, a messenger arrived with news that changed everything. Representatives from the core worlds want to meet with you, the young being said, struggling to catch his breath after his hasty journey. They're forming a new confederation, and they want both of you to help draft the charter. Elira and Jack exchanged glances. The core worlds had been the Empire's heartland, the source of its power and authority. If they were truly ready to embrace democratic ideals, it would mark a turning point for the entire galaxy. Tell them we'll come, Jack said. But we travel as advisors, not rulers. The age of dictating to others is over. As they prepared for their journey, Elira reflected on how far they had all come. The galaxy that had once trembled under the Empire's iron fist was slowly learning to govern itself. It would not be easy, democracy never was, but it was better than the alternative. Their ship lifted from Haven's surface on a bright morning, carrying them toward whatever challenges lay ahead. In the cargo hold were carefully tended seedlings from their garden gifts for those they would meet on their journey. Life, they had learned, had a way of taking root in the most unlikely places. As they entered hyperspace and the stars became streaks of light around them, Elira took Jack's hand and smiled. The future was uncertain, as futures always were, but it was theirs to shape. And that, she thought, was the greatest gift of all, the freedom to choose their own path among the stars. Behind them, Haven turned slowly in the light of its sun, a small world, where children played in gardens planted by those who had once been sworn enemies. It was a symbol of what the galaxy could become given time and patience and the courage to hope. In the distance, other ships traveled between the stars carrying trade and stories, ideas, and dreams. The galaxy was vast beyond imagining, filled with countless worlds and countless possibilities. Some would rise, others would fall, but all would be free to try. And in that freedom, hard won and carefully tended, lay the hope of the future.